Okay. Hello everyone. I'm so sorry about this. I only had about a week back, and now I have to. One of my jobs is deploying me to California for some work, and there's a good chance I'll be gone for a few weeks. But one of the sections has gotten through Romanticism in Germany and the United States, and they're like halfway through Romanticism in France. So you guys in that section can just skip ahead a bit. But the other section you'll need to watch the whole thing. But again, of course, feel free to watch it on a faster speed or what have you. But please do take notes, and also please email me if you have any questions. So in Germany, where this is actually the only artist we're going to look at, is Caspar David Friedrich. This is Monk by the Sea. So kind of typical with Romanticism, we like the nature. This is kind of typical. We looked at Turner before in England, the sublime idea of nature, and even if we put human figures and whatnot, they're usually quite dwarfed, pretty insignificant. We do have that idea for some time with the Industrial Revolution that's kind of like man taming nature, but here really just showing that nature can't be controlled. This is Monk. He's just definitely dwarfed by the landscape. So it's supposed to give you that sense of the sublime, that the landscape is beautiful, but it's kind of awesome and terrifying, and give you the idea that God's presence is shown in nature rather than in a church necessarily. And so, like, the monk is worshiping outside, or supposed to give you that idea. And there actually was a known theologian who delivered sermons on the shore of the Baltic Sea. His name is Klostergarten, but you don't really need to know that guy. But yeah, so pretty similar, akin to Turner. Definitely a different, a bit different stylistically. You should be able to tell the difference between them. But there's this, and then there's this, which I'm not a huge fan of Star Wars, but this is actually quite a masterpiece. Belongs in a museum. Definitely would say that. So this is quite good. Good job, Joseph. But yeah. Okay, and this is the companion piece to Monk by the Sea, the Abbey in an Oak Forest or Abbey in the Oak Wood. Pretty much, same thing, call it whatever. But the mood here is silent, bleak, kind of this like somber sky at twilight. Feels very cold. I mean, it's wintertime, and everything is either dead or is dying. This is a medieval abbey. It is crumbling. It's representing an age past, just like, well, the human achievement here is crumbling. And there is a funeral procession going on. Kind of hard to notice. It almost looks like they're just more headstones. But it's thought to be of the monk from the previous piece. But the people are very insignificant. What's more significant is nature. Nature outlives the achievements of man. That's the idea, right? But there are some more subtle senses of hope, right? We get this new moon over here. It's very small. And it's kind of that symbol of rebirth. Morning will come, spring will come, the trees will no longer be dormant, and even the resurrection will come. We have crosses, stuff like this. So again, dealing with the sublime, those awesome, frightening forces of nature, wanting us to see God's presence in nature, maybe even more so than in the church. I mean, the church is in ruin. But this is also works along those lines. That's pretty typical in Romanticism of the nationalism. Which is pretty typical in that Romantic movement. There were a lot of different folk songs and folk stories, like the Brothers Grimm, Herder, and whatnot, that were collecting lots of these German stuff. And so they were kind of searching for the shared past, just like united the people. And that helped. Well, it helped unite the people more than an allegiance to an aristocracy did. But in 1810, there actually is no Germany. It's just a loose union of about 300 German-speaking states, and the hope of that unification at the time was kind of crushed under Napoleon's rule. So it will become united a bit later. But at this time, there kind of is this. This is kind of reflecting that national mood, the national crisis. And this is actually supposed to be a Gothic abbey. And Goethe said that he claimed that Gothic architecture originated in Germany, so it's supposed to be kind of an homage to that in regards, kind of the symbols of demise of nationalism at this point. So there are some more subtle things like that. But again, it's pretty similar to Turner's Similar Force of Nature, but kind of dissimilar in style. Friedrich's a bit more detailed, he gets harder lines. But yeah, we are seeing landscape as a metaphor for the transience of life and human achievement. Here's what another student did. It's actually really cool. So we'll skip that. Okay, Romanticism in America. So America has pretty much been skipped out at this point. Early on in its history, they're trying to survive. We did get some colonialist, like British settlers, like Benjamin West, who were painting. But we do, and most of what we get before that is portraiture, mostly portraits. And there's a really popular thing called miniatures, like these really small portraits that you could carry around on your person and stuff like that. So those, like, there were still painting, of course, but not really in, the style that everyone else is doing in Europe. But we're only gonna look at this one. This is The Oxbow by Thomas Cole. So in the early 1800s in the United States, we actually started to get art academies established, so like Pennsylvania, Boston, New York, and there's kind of this struggle to find our own national identity, like separate from European roots. And so unlike Europe, we don't really have a lot of churches, like medieval, Romanesque, anything like that. We don't have a lot of those churches hanging around, as you may imagine and know. And so they pretty much decided that the land itself was America's spiritual heritage. There's a lot of land in the United States. So it's relatively unspoiled compared to Europe, which is relatively overpopulated, and it's full of natural resources. So the landscape became the national symbol. And this is pretty much America's first art movement. This mostly starts in the 1820s, and it's part of a school, essentially, they call the Hudson River School. They traveled along the Hudson River Valley and would make studies, but they would go back to their studios, usually in New York, to finish their paintings. But this one was actually made for an exhibition at the National Academy of Design, of which Thomas Cole was a founding member. And we do get the sense of the sublime with like the blasted trees and the storm here on the left, but it is heavily juxtaposed with the cultivated fields. So perhaps this idea of in harmony with nature, Cole would probably say that we aren't really in harmony with nature, but that we could be. We could be better. He was kind of an environmentalist. So you definitely get this human presence. We get the dead trees and the seedlings as well. So it's kind of the cycle of life, death, resurrection. So similar to Friedrich, but opposed to Friedrich's mood. It's a bit more optimistic. It's not as gloomy. And this would work along the lines of lots of the American transcendentalist movement with people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, works like Nature and Walden. But Cole kind of actually already found the destruction of wilderness and the lack of respect for the land disheartening. Like I said, he was kind of an early environmentalist. So he wanted to keep the landscape pure and live in harmony with the land. So, yeah, that's kind of what the idea is. That, we may cultivate it as we move west with manifest destiny and whatnot, but we should at least try to be as decent as possible as we're stewards of the land. So... And Cole actually is known for painting a lot of series. He does like a series of life with like infancy, youth, whatnot, stormy waters for adulthood and stuff like that. But also the Course of Empire series where there's like this primitive and then an agrarian society, then a thriving empire, then a decadent empire, and then we're like in state of ruin and stuff like that. So he does a lot of series that are worth looking at if you would like to. But yeah, and here's Cole himself. Some people don't know where to see it. He's right down here. But there he is. Maybe like a little smirk on his face. Nice hat he's got. And here's an infographic. You have to do this for your one assignment. Hopefully that wasn't too rough. Here is a writing assignment. One section's already done this, but for you other guys, make sure to email this to me. How would you define the term romanticism to a friend? When we hear the word romantic, we think about love, dating, courtship, etc. But how does that relate to our definition of the stylistic period known as romanticism? So feel free to pause it here. Take a couple minutes to answer those questions and get it to me. Okay, please, thank you. Okay, Romanticism in France. So France is pretty much going to be the center of the art world. London will be a big competitor, but Paris is going to be the center of the art world essentially till World War II. Still. And here we got Jean-Auguste Dominique Ang. Some users call him Anglais. You can call him whatever. I'm not really good with French names, so yeah. But this is a portrait of Napoleon on his imperial throne. So here's Napoleon looking so important. This is actually very heavily modeled off of God the Father from the Ghent altarpiece, which is actually in Napoleon's possession in the Louvre at this point. It was taken from Ghent. They looted it from Ghent. Here's that. You see that figure in the center there? Hopefully you can definitely see that. So, yeah, we are referencing ourselves as God of the Father. We get this very frontal pose, which again was originally reserved for divinity. Has been used for royalty for some time. Sometimes you get artists like Dürer who, do their own thing with it. But heavy emphasis on the textures, the details, the opulence. Ong is really good at that. But Napoleon's giving you this idea that he's sanctioned by God. He's like emperor by divine right, which is not really out of place. Lots of emperors would do such things. But we do get a lot of sharp lines as stark composition. It's pretty typical of neoclassicism, but it is a lot more exotic in that regard, and it's a bit more romantic. What we got though is here he's holding two scepters. This golden scepter on the left is from Charlemagne, who's that really really important Frankish Holy Roman Empire conqueror. He's started the first modern university in Aachen, Germany. What is present-day Germany, and then he also is the one that pushed out the Muslims from Spain and stuff like that. So he's a really, really important medieval king, perhaps the most important. And then on the other one, they have the ivory hand of justice. And this is for French medieval kings. So we're just certifying our royal legacy here. But the artist did study in Rome, like most, and he sent back pictures like these for the exhibition. This one actually itself was not well received. Maybe people just didn't like Napoleon. I don't know. Look at this face. That doesn't look like a likable face, but whatever. A lot of people did like Napoleon. But there's the Ghent altarpiece again. There's the cat. I'd much rather be under his rule than Napoleon. But just to give you an idea of how much detail this guy is known for. He doesn't often feel as romantic, during the era of Romanticism as some of the others perhaps, but very talented artist. Another one, very much well known for his hyperrealism and textures. Very good at that. Okay. But here's Antoine Jongul, Napoleon in the Pissed House at Jaffa. So this is about 5 years prior. This was painted in 1804. Napoleon hired the artist to paint battle scenes and kind of glorify the military campaign, so to paint propaganda, essentially. And that's what this is. So Napoleon made sure that the paintings were seen at the salons and that they were reported on by the press, control the press, all that good stuff. But this painting exhibited in Paris Salon in 1804, the same year it was painted, and it was highly acclaimed. It's really big. It's 23 feet wide. The story is essentially that Napoleon visits his troops in a sick house in Jaffa. I'm actually not exactly sure who controlled Jaffa at that point, but it's present day Israel. We are inside of a mosque, though. This is Islamic architecture, if you could not tell. But he's visiting his troops who are sick with the bubonic plague. It's broken out among some of his troops, and he's actually touching an open wound here. So it's kind of meant to show bravery and this sense of humanity. And the reality, though, is that Napoleon actually poisoned these same sick troops when he left Jaffa and killed them. So, so much for humanity. But we can see the influence from Caravaggio with the light and dark, how much darker it is over here and such. The Damned Man over here that was reminiscent of Michelangelo from The Last Judgment. We do get the framing with the arches, like the architecture framing it, which is pretty akin to David, the neoclassical painter, who was actually his teacher. but it's pretty romantic in the sense that it's pretty exotic. We like the Islamic architecture, the attendance with costumes, and this painting actually is going to help launch the popularity of such exotic subjects. But we also get the horror of death, which is kind of a romantic thing. But you can see the framing of the architecture as we saw with like David and whatnot. So, okay, Jericho, the Raft of the Medusa. So this is another contemporary event. This happened just 3 years prior to when Jericho painted it. So the Medusa was a French government ship. It foundered at sea. The captain gave the 6 lifeboats to the government officials, the ones deemed more important. And then the other 150 passengers had to use a makeshift raft, which was built just before the ship sunk. It was set adrift, so they were getting pulled by a lifeboat, and essentially they were cut loose at command of the captain. And they were all supposed to die, but they didn't. Only a handful of them did survive. But they were rescued 2 weeks later, and the event was heavily condemned in the press, kind of as an example of the corruption of the new king, who was Louis XVIII, which is this during the Restoration period, so Restoration of the King, as Napoleon was defeated a few years prior in 1815. He's currently in exile. But this is the moment when a distant ship is sighted. So we get this idea of despair, death, and dying on the left, and it kind of like leads into hope, survival. But again, idea of like man versus nature. There's definitely no way the men would have survived if they were not rescued. We get this wide range of emotions. This guy's kind of just dead. But these guys are very hopeful, desperate, for it. But lots of horror, suffering. He is kind of this hero figure because he's the highest up, but he's definitely not a traditional hero figure. Kind of just exploring man's inhumanity to other people. Like the inhumanity of the captain towards them, inhumanity towards each other. We have things like cannibalism that happened. So there is a tendency of Romanticism to kind of ask some questions that we wouldn't really have asked in art before. But we do get this diagonal composition, which is kind of typical of Baroque art, kind of juts into our space. We do get the light and dark again from Caravaggio. We do know that Jericho actually did studies of the reconstructed raft, and he actually would go to a morgue and study dead bodies and limbs and looked at drowned bodies to kind of capture the details, make it as realistic as possible. So kind of like a precedence to photojournalism. But it is actually still pretty carefully planned and organized, and the bodies are still classical. Muscular, not really gaunt. But this is in style of a history painting, so it's a bit different as we kind of started seeing during this period more so, is that it's a history painting, but it's a contemporary subject again. So it's not classical, it's not biblical, which is what it typically would have been. So. There's that quote from this student. It's pretty good, actually. A little practice though. Okay, artist is A. Jericho. Stylistic period of this work is C. Romanticism. That's what we're looking at. Painting shows an event from A. The artist's own times, as opposed to what would typically be in a history painting. The painting is best characterized by B. So I actually didn't say this, but a pyramidal composition. So this is something that we haven't seen so much, especially since like the High Renaissance, as much. But yeah, we do have a pyramidal composition. It's not exactly centered, but there is that. The painting exhibits each of the following characteristics except A. So we do have a sense of horror and despair, sense of immediacy and drama, and dramatic contrast and light and shade, but we do not have a hierarchic scale. That's not something we really get too much past ancient art. Okay, but you see that diagonal stuff we get with the Baroque, as we saw with the Rubens. No. Okay. We're gonna look at Delacroix. So this guy's a pretty big name. This is a photograph, so photography is coming up. First photograph happened in 1826. It takes a few more years for it to be like the process to be improved upon and to get out to the public. About 1840 essentially is when it gets out to the public more. But he is a friend of Jericho. He actually posed for one of the figures on the raft of Medusa. He heavily admired Rubens and Titian, their painterly aspects. Um, but here is a photograph of him by Nadar, who's a pretty important figure. If you take the history of photography class, you'll learn about Nadar. Um, but here is the scenes from the massacre at Chios. So Delacroix called himself a modern classicist. He liked the classical muscularity, and he'd like to present his works like a frieze, as you could probably see here. But it's definitely still a contemporary event, so modern. Um, but this is a part of the Greece has been controlled by Turkey for a very long time, for the most part, and this is a Greek revolution like against the ruling Turks, and so the Turks raided the Greek island of Chios, kind of as an example, and they massacred or enslaved the whole population of about 20,000 people, which is not out of place in Ottoman history, but Europeans supported the Greek independence essentially, so they had this passion for democracy and individual freedom. Also sympathized because, and this is pretty typical, the Greeks were Christian and the Turks were Muslims. But in the foreground, we get the group rounded up for slavery or execution, also rape, definitely implied. But their sense of hopelessness and doom and suffering. We do not get any individual heroes, kind of treating the Greeks collectively as martyrs. But we do get the apex of the pyramid are the villains, the unfeeling soldiers. We get the dead and the dying, kind of reminiscent of the raft of Medusa. But critics actually felt it was not a subject for painting, but he became known as the great Romantic painter. This is actually the year Jericho died this same year in 1824. And before, Romanticism had only actually been applied to as a term for music, like with Berlioz, and writing, like Victor Hugo. So he's the one that kind of gets it applied to painting. And this is the one that's, again, I don't know why it says Liberty, Liberty, Liberty Bibbity, Liberty Mutual over here, but Liberty leading the people. So it's Delacroix, is a very famous one. He was not like originally part of this movement necessarily, but he joined in. But this is during the French Revolution. This is an allegorical figure, Liberty. So despite the death all in front of us here in the foreground, it's again relatively optimistic. We get the clouds of puffs of smoke from the muskets and stuff like that. We get a kid doing this, and this guy is at her feet. But very nationalistic, very patriotic. So. But essentially, this painting is a great display of both the bright side and the dark side to warfare. So he's not neglecting displaying the horror that comes with the revolution. Bodies are strewn about. So even the men that are still alive that charge forward, they're stepping over the bodies of their fellow brothers in the cause. So, but it is giving you a sense of hope and pride in self and in country, essentially. So Delacroix is displaying his great talent for detail and figure, but also for feeling and emotion. You can see in the painting essentially the defiance of the French people and their unwillingness to endure their sufferings any longer. So you can probably see why it's very famous. This is what Delacroix had to say about painting for his country, essentially. My bad mood is vanishing thanks to hard work. I've embarked on a modern subject, a barricade, and if I haven't fought for my country, at least I'll paint for her. So, I think it's nice and wholesome. Let's skip that. There's that. Okay, another Delacroix. This one's pretty famous. Death of Sardanapalus. So, this is a story based on a poem by Lord Byron, who's a contemporary. This was the poem was written about 1821, and it's kind of historical fiction. He was supposed to be the last of the Assyrian kings. We know that's not actually the case, but he was overthrown by rebels because of his immorality and slothfulness. But rather than fight, he pretty much ordered his palace and all its contents to be destroyed with him in it. So it kind of definitely, that's him up here on the bed. Indifference versus the passion of the women, even the horse and stuff. You know, they want to live. So there is no hero really. The main character is the opposite of a hero. We are using Baroque lighting, even like Goya did, you know, and lots of these guys have done, to heighten the emotional impact. We get lots of S shapes, like this kind of writhing snake-like, kind of make it more lively. But the skin tones actually do have greens and blues, so we're using like this emotional use of color, but it's very loose. But it's romantic, especially seeing it's pretty turbulent, pretty sensual, with like perhaps this woman especially here. But this passionate involvement, like the color versus line, the spontaneous movements, the chaotic composition versus the like as opposed to cool, detached, formal neoclassicism. So we do get no redeeming moral here, just kind of fascinating horror, which there's romanticism. Okay, and then another Delacroix, Women of Algiers. Algiers is in North Africa. He actually did go to Morocco to document a diplomatic mission, and he would make watercolor sketches instead of like going to Rome like most people did. But he's kind of combining the classical dignity with taste for the exotic architecture, clothing, fabrics, tiles. There's actually a harem, which wouldn't really be allowed to do. This is where like all the women of the house would be allowed to be in, like the wives, the concubines, all the female servants and stuff. So we kind of had to receive special permission. The mood, though, is kind of one of luxury or in almost sensuousness. But the palette is a bit more colorful. We get this dappled light in color. Not really like this neoclassical planarity in line. But the shadows are colored. They're not black. So it's just kind of at the time, like a breakthrough in painting. Same thing Vermeer does and stuff. But you can see the painterliness in some of the details. Okay, another good guy to know, Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot. So this guy is actually pretty prolific. There's about, at least cataloged online as of a few years ago, there might be more, but there's 888 paintings of his, so he did a lot. This is a view of Rome, the bridge in Castel Sant'Angelo with the cupola of St. Peter's Castel. He did a lot of fast oil studies outdoors. He didn't really idealize his scenes. He would make them larger and change compositions, but he tried not to idealize them. He went to Italy, made about 150 small paintings, mostly of famous sites. They were usually made on the spot in an hour or so. So, gonna get you this idea of the truth of the moment, and hopefully, like the light, the reflection, the clouds, they're really not stylized or planned. So we definitely don't get a staged foreground or middle ground or background. So, still kind of classical in style with a sense of clarity, stability, calm, strong verticals and horizontals. Not really those writhing S shapes like Delacroix, the colors and harmony. But we do get painterly brushwork, which we would not have seen in neoclassicism. And it's definitely not staged like Poussin and his Baroque classicism. So we get these fresh lights and colors. And here's another one. This one definitely doesn't feel neoclassical. It looks more romantic, right? It's kind of the indistinct, hazy, kind of evokes a sense of longing, nostalgia, maybe this magical light or reflections. And so the brushstrokes are kind of gone. It's kind of this more layered glazes. It kind of makes everything light, ethereal. We do have this tonal palette, all browns and shades of gray, green, blue to silver. And then kind of about creating a poetic mood more than telling a story. So it's the idyllic, kind of like Claude Lorraine versus the ideal. But that's pretty much all for the artists. We're gonna look at a little bit of these revival styles. This is a period when we get lots of revival styles. Gothic revival is really big during this period. So The most famous would probably be Gothic Revival, and this is probably the most famous Gothic Revival building. So this was commissioned in 1836. The former had burned down, but pretty much meant to bring a sense of national pride. England's past, less sublime, more picturesque. To get the stable balance, the symmetry. Hired Pugin to do the Gothic details, the spiky towers and stuff. Gothic arches and tracery. So kind of get these fortress-like towers, these battlements. But yeah, this is the English Parliament. Yeah, it says up here, of course, in London. So, here's another one, the Royal Pavilion in Brighton. So this is a good example of Orientalism that I mentioned before. These cast iron onion domes and minarets. So we're kind of looking at Gothic, but also Chinese, Islamic, and Indian architecture, both inside and out. So you can call this eclecticism, kind of just combining several styles and periods. It's a bit interesting. And now this is 200 years old. So. Here's the Trinity Church in New York City. Good old Gothic. Perhaps more reminiscent. This is the kind of before it was actually. This is before it was redone, but the Provo Tabernacle. And this is it. This would be considered a Gothic revival as well. There you go, out in the window. So very famous for us in BYU, Idaho. Well, this is the Salt Lake Temple. This is definitely Gothic revival. It's kind of an eclectic style, though. We get the Gothic towers, battlements, but the arches are more Romanesque. So. And then we get these symbolisms, of course. But here's an owl. More owls. Another owl. More owls. Okay, but these are your works you want to know for Romanticism. Definitely want to know Goya, Fuseli, Blake, Constable, a couple Turners, both the Friedrichs. Want to know Thomas Cole, and all of our Frenchies. 3 Delacroix. So make sure to know these. These will be on the same exam as Rococo and Neoclassicism, and the next lectures will be the start of a new unit. But again, of course, feel free to email me with any questions, concerns. Sorry again that I'm not having surgery again, but I'm going out of town, so there's that. But yeah, I will see you guys next time.